stop. Hated Disney cartoons. Okay, in retrospect, this was a hard one. Given the number of shows Disney has under its belt, it makes sense that there would be a few of them that kinda rub people the wrong way to the point of receiving a ton of hate. But to my shock, as I began looking at Disney's catalog, I was struggling to find many cartoons that I could say were actually hated. Now, there were some really mediocre or outright bad shows here, but the reception to most of them was incredibly mild. People experienced them the first time, considered them to be bad, and then moved on, forgetting about them entirely. People actually had reasonable reactions for a change. Hold me, I'm gonna faint. I think there's a very important distinction to be made between something that's poorly received and something that's hated, because while they definitely aren't mutually exclusive, I was struggling to find many Disney cartoons that kicked up that much of a fuss, which in a way made this video a lot more interesting than I initially thought it'd be, because there was something individually special about each of these shows that caused them to kick up such a massive fuss, or they're remembered for one very specific reason only to not be talked about ever again. And to be frank, this is not a video made to parrot the things people have been saying about these shows for years, because honestly, I think a lot of the hate towards a lot of these shows is super overblown. These shows may not be great, but I think it's worth highlighting some of their strengths when necessary, because they all seem to have their fans, and I think looking at how they got their infamously poor reputations is far more interesting than the shows themselves. Would you believe me if I've told you half the people who've rated Primos on IMDb haven't actually watched it? I mean, I have no evidence for that claim, but given no one talked about the show when it came out compared to when all the drama surrounding its announcement happened, you know it's true. This video isn't another excuse for me to make fun of Primos. I actually have some nice things to say about it, ignoring the obvious. These are 6 of the most hated Disney cartoons ever made. There are obviously more than this, but I think talking about 6 TV shows is good enough for today. If you want to hear about more hated Disney cartoons in the future, then subscribe. This whole bit is me trying to test if that feature where the subscribe button glows where you say subscribe actually works. I've never seen it happen myself, so I'm probably just wasting my time here. Anyway, ever wonder what a Disney show would look like if it's made on PowerPoint? Now, back in the day, everybody used to cite Pickle and Peanut as one of the worst Disney shows of all time, and yet despite that, I can count the number of people I know who have watched it on one hand. Yeah, it's me! People mostly seemed confused as to how a show that meets the exact criteria for being a professional shitpost was somehow greenlit by Disney of all companies and allowed to be broadcast on TV. And then I guess there was also the creator of the show responding to Cartoon Brew by calling them cum-guzzling trolls, which a lot of people got mad at him for. I mean, personally, I'd cut him a little bit of slack. Cartoon Brew aren't people. But yeah, people seem to really hate this show quite a bit, and it's regularly spotted on the list of the worst Disney cartoons or worst cartoons for the 2010s. And I mean, it's not great. But if your sense of humor is completely irony poisoned like mine, then you can definitely have a good time with this show. The description of a professional shitpost really is the most fitting way you can pitch this show to anyone who might be interested. I mean, the show's intro basically tells you what you're in for, with a bunch of random things being listed set to a SoundCloud beat financed by Blue Peter. I'd play it in full so you can understand, but I'm not about to be known as the guy who got a copyright strike for playing the Pickle and Peanut intro. I'm fully convinced that, just like with Uncle Grandpa, if this show was an online web series, not an official Disney or Cartoon Network product respectively, it would be received far better and may have actually been more successful. People have called the presentation all kinds of things, lazy, ugly, but there is a level of earnest I don't care to the whole thing and how they pace their visual gags that makes it oddly charming to me. I guess it's just because the show reminds me too much of old school indie animations you'd find on Newgrounds back in the 2000s, and that kind of stuff happens to be my kryptonite, so I'm probably giving them too much slack here, but who cares that much. And I mean, sometimes they do some creative stuff with the mixed media style they're going for, so it's not that bad. So many people were just shocked that something this visually non-conformative and rebellious came from Disney, who still had their relatively clean public image when the show came out, and people usually expected the highest quality productions from them. And people also had a problem with the fact that at the end of the day, the show was very random equals funny, which naturally makes everything it does completely hit or miss. Now, again, my humor is completely brain rotted, so often I find myself laughing at the dumbest shit ever, but there were just plenty of jokes here that didn't land or were trying way too hard, and that's without mentioning how many gross out jokes there are. It's a very hyperactive show too, not very accommodating of anyone watching it who's past the age of 9. This show has its fans, and I can definitely see why, if nothing else. Either you vibe with the show's sense of humor that's mostly put together by the National Committee of Professional Dart Player Rejects, or you don't. There have been far more draining Disney cartoons than this, and I'm too charmed by how stupid the show looks to give half a damn about how lazy it is. Look, there's bad animation, and then there's being intentionally crass. I can't get mad at this, how could you? I just think it's really funny that both Cartoon Network and Disney had shows running in the 2010s that would have fit right at home on YouTube and Newgrounds, and both of which got pummeled through the floor for not meeting quality standards. In all fairness, I think Uncle Grandpa grandpa dog walks Pickle and Peanut any day of the week because it's actually somewhat decent, but Pickle and Peanut, it really ain't that bad, honestly. I don't care if the creator crashed out publicly, it was funny, and it was even funnier that they made an article about being called cum guzzlers, come on. Ooh, the hellfires that this one cooked up. If you aren't currently recovering from a late night pub crawl and actually saw the thumbnail for this video, Primos is likely what you're here for. The show has been wrapped up in controversy for about a year and a half now. People still talk about everything that happened to this day. Guess I better give a small refresher, so it goes a little something like this. Bad Spanish stereotypes, a child being named after a woman's private parts, a town named after earthquakes, people were offended, voice actress for the main character hops online and makes a complete ass of herself.
So be mad at me all you want for misspelling words in Spanish.
People mistake her for the show's creator. People mistake this photo of a bunch of white people as the people behind the show when they aren't. Should have been obvious because Dr. fucking Doofenshmirtz was in this image, but I guess people were really seeing red here. Show gets pushed back for a year, gets leaked a month out from release, and then releases to literally no fanfare. Okay, recap over. As much as people still remember the Primos controversy and hold it against the show to this day, you don't see anyone actually talking about the show itself. Even when the show was released, it was just crickets from basically everyone. And look, the sad reality is that the controversy is just straight up more interesting than the show itself in this case. There were some genuine screw-ups here. I mean, they literally redubbed the intro to fix the sad case of this girl's name. Some leaps in logic from the people who are understandably offended, and then the voice actress for the main character kinda kicked the hornet's nest for literally no reason. It's a massive string of interesting failures. Of course no one was actually gonna bother to watch the show afterwards, it's not as interesting. And I can confirm as someone who has in fact watched the show, it's fine. Primos is about a girl named Tater who has to deal with her 12 cousins moving in with her for the summer as she discovers just what it is that makes her special. And generally, if you look at the show's premise along with what we've actually seen of it so far, it's basically just a standard fare Disney cartoon. Similar art style to most 2010s cartoons, and your opinions on that may vary, but visually I think the show is rather decent. People have made their comparisons, saying it's Disney's version of Loud House or the Casa Grandes, and I think those are all warranted and they were kinda asking for it in the first place. But the show itself is very run-of-the-mill. Animation is decent if you can get past the character designs, some of the jokes were funny, its heart is clearly in the right place, the show's soundtrack fucking slaps for some reason. Yeah, one thing I definitely didn't catch was that the show was gonna have plenty of musical sequences, and honestly, there are some bangers here. They literally have a better villain song than fucking Wish. Like, how is that possible? Can't play it, obviously, but if you like electro swing, then give it a listen, you might just get some enjoyment out of it. Overall, while it's not my thing, Primos definitely did not deserve the sheer extent of the hatred it got. Deserve to be criticized? Yeah, absolutely. They called someone a vagina by accident, but now with the majority of the problematic stuff fixed or removed, the show is just okay. I definitely recommend giving it a watch to form your own thoughts because I certainly enjoyed it more than I thought I would, but it will always be a sad fact that the hilarious string of f***ups that led to the show being universally dunked on will always be more interesting to talk about than the show itself. With how people talk about fish hooks nowadays, you'd be shocked to find out that around 10 years ago, the show was a bit of a punching bag. I've seen it on several lists of the worst Disney shows ever, and lots of people at the time complained about the show being super annoying. The IMDb reviews for this thing are some of the harshest I've seen for any Disney cartoon, and yet you ask someone what they thought of fish hooks today, and you're very likely to find people who have positive or outright glowing things to say about it, or at least settle for calling it okay. I do think a large part of this is nostalgia. I highly doubt most teens or adults are going to put an episode of Fish Hooks on to relive the glory days, but what was it about this relatively harmless cartoon that got so many people riled up? I don't know. Trying to think of something else to say here, but Fish Hooks is a weird one. If you told me I was stretching for things to include in this list, then you'd be correct. I said this was difficult from the start, but I really can't grasp why Fish Hooks of all shows was dragged through the mud as much as it was. Maybe it had something to do with the allergies people developed for flash animation in the 2010s. Fish Hooks doesn't look bad by any means, but it's definitely not the kind of show you look at and go, ah, I see. Disney. And admittedly, the show did start pretty rough. The first few episodes are weak as hell, but over time it starts developing into a much better cartoon. It still has plenty of moments where it's really annoying or mind-numbing, but it's definitely watchable. The most interesting thing about this show is how many big names are attached to it. Justin Roiland, creator of Rick and Morty, C.H. Greenblatt, creator of Chowder, and Alex Hirsch, creator of, well, you know. In many ways, you could say this show is a waste of talent, but if you think about this another way, Fish Hooks is one of the most important Disney shows ever made. There was a whole deal struck between Disney and Alex Hirsch, where they said they'd help him create Gravity Falls if he helped them create Fish Hooks. If there was no Fish Hooks, there would be no Gravity Falls.
There was sort of a deal made where they said, if you help us develop one of our shows, we'll help you develop one of your shows. Right. So they said, if you help us come up with characters for the Fish High School show, we will consider your pitch for a show about you and your sister and your grandpa.
So there's a neat bit of Disney lore you likely didn't know. Credit to that Gravity Falls fan and Hannah Hyperfixates in their interview of Alex that I'll be linking in the description. As for everyone else on here, well, C.H. Greenblatt would go on to create Harvey Beaks and get absolutely railed by Nickelodeon, and Justin Roiland would go on to create Rick and Morty, and okay, let's not talk about the next part. Fishhooks is way overhated for what it is, and while I think it's still pretty mediocre, it's definitely not one of the worst Disney cartoons ever. I mean, come on. There are far worse shows out there, hated or otherwise.
Surrender before me and my lackeys destroy you completely.
Wait, that's just a catchy.
How can such a worthless piece of trash be more special than me?
Alright, chill out. Spider-Man 2017 is probably one of the most lifeless and miserably bland adaptations of Spider-Man to ever exist. It came off the heels of Ultimate Spider-Man, which was just the most abysmal dog-shit Spider-Man cartoon of all time, and I completely stand by that. There is just nothing enjoyable about that show. And Spider-Man 2017 was looking to course-correct things with something more in line with Spectacular Spider-Man, which Disney was responsible for cancelling in the first place, so thanks I guess, you f***s. And while that may have been their intent with this one, they really failed hard. As far as Spider-Man stories go, this is just so by the numbers, predictable. Okay, I lied. There's one thing I didn't predict this show would do. Turning Peter Parker into the living embodiment of the f***ing nerd emoji and making me wish I got the opportunity to slam him into a locker. While he does get more tolerable over time, they really lean hard into the dorky and geeky side of Peter in this show, and I don't like it one bit because they go overboard. Peter Parker is a geek. He is also a dork. This show completely flanderizes those aspects of him and made him super annoying in the process, spouting a bunch of science babble, really trying too hard to sell how much of a genius he is, and it doesn't work. Like, listen to this and try and tell me you wouldn't take this guy's mouth shut if given the chance.
Sphenopalatine ganglioneuralgia? Did you just say brain freeze like everyone else? But that wouldn't be accurate.
Oh my god, shut up. It's a crying shame too, because Robbie Daymond is one of my favorite voice actors ever, and I think he has the right kind of voice to kill as Peter Parker, yet he's constantly given the most whiny voice direction here, and it's really hard to listen to. He also gets better as the show goes on, but as far as Peter Parker voices go, he's unfortunately pretty close to the bottom. I did find it very funny when they started doing the Superior Spider-Man storyline. He just uses Black Mask, a catchy voice. I'm sorry, but as someone who has beaten Persona 5 an unhealthy amount of times, I just couldn't unhear it. It's so funny to me.
Friends or not, you are in my way. Don't lecture me, you piece of shit.
Animation-wise, this is also a really unimpressive looking series. The dull colors really suck the life out of it too. While the show does have its fair share of more serious stories and moments that make it far more tolerable than Ultimate Spider-Man, it's still a poorly balanced show that it's not very tonally consistent. And don't get me started on how it chooses to adapt certain storylines. I may actually burst a blood vessel. Spider-Man 2017 is a very poor Spider-Man show and definitely deserves a lot of the hate it gets for being really bland and uninspired, especially because a year after the show premiered, we would get Into the Spider-Verse, which is just the antithesis to how creatively bankrupt this whole series feels. I didn't grow up with the original Proud Family, but I know a lot of people who did, and many can attest that the original series was a classic and managed to be topical with plenty of tact. Even when I went to watch the series for the first time myself a good few years back, I was pleasantly surprised, and the show always felt like it was coming from a genuine place. The Proud Family Louder and Prouder is in a very unique position where no one from bigots to fans of the original series seem to vibe with it. While it's incredibly easy to write off many of the critiques of the show as bigots not reacting well to how much louder and prouder the reboot is, my issue completely lies with the show's tact. Whereas the original show was a fun and entertaining comedy first, the reboot is a lot angrier and more upfront with its commentary. The original show wasn't all about social issues, it was still a Disney Channel comedy at heart, so the leap when it comes to subject matter here is staggering and very noticeable. The dialogue from nearly every character feels like it's coming from someone giving you a lecture. The charm and wit of the original series is completely gone, and it's not like even the replacement is intelligently written. I would have no problem if it was actually good. I mean, there's literally a scene here where someone gets confronted on their white fragility, and instead of it being handled intelligently, or actually feels like it's tackling the issue, they just throw White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo on the table and ask him to read it in a way that also feels like it's asking the viewers to read it. Instead of intelligently tackling the topic, the show just points at a real-life book and then tells you to read it. And yes, it's a good book, but this is just lazy and preachy writing. And on one hand, I get it. The two shows were made during two very different time periods, and things have definitely changed to a point where being subtle just isn't enough anymore. But on the other hand, the reboot sacrifices so much of the original's charm and enjoyability to be more preachy and tackle issues regarding race head on. And that would be one thing if they tackled everything with an appropriate amount of tact, but Louder and Prouder gets very complicated to talk about. Now, I am white, so I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea from any of this. I've seen some dumb motherfuckers trying to critique this show, only to end up saying something insanely racist and overplaying their hand, and it really sucks that people like that have poisoned the well of criticism here. But there are many points of Louder and Prouder where it feels like they go overboard and end up getting the messaging completely backwards. Like, for example, there's an episode where a boy asks out Zoe and everything seems to be fine, only for one of the new characters to just randomly drop a poorly substantiated rumor that the boy only dates white girls and stirs everyone into a frenzy. The episode actually had a really good opportunity here to address colorism in a tasteful manner, but instead it completely flips the script and has every character treat Zoe like the villain in this situation, even though she did literally nothing wrong, and the episode completely falls apart because of it. All of her friends ostracize her over a small rumor they heard with literally no verification, and it's all around just a really mean-spirited episode that completely fumbles its race-related topic. The show fumbles a lot of things compared to the originals, honestly. All of the characters feel incredibly flanderized here, especially Penny's friends, who are just the absolute worst here and are fake as f. The new activist character, I forgot her name, whose whole personality is being an activist, she's not only boring as sin, but she ends up causing so many unnecessary conflicts in the show by stirring the pot for no reason. Like when she randomly spread that rumor I was talking about a second ago. Generally, it feels like the show just doesn't have its head screwed on correctly either. And I'm not even talking about how it handles race-related topics here. The Proud family has always tackled race in some form of fashion, whether it's as extreme as the new show or as subtle and tactful as the old one. I genuinely do not mind. But as I just said, the show just doesn't have its head screwed on correctly in some instances. Like there's an episode where Penny gets locked out of the house by her parents for coming home late, and it's for some reason framed as this comedic mishap, despite this being a very real issue and example of child abuse that could have been taken seriously and addressed properly here. This is a very real scenario that a lot of people have trauma over and has literally gotten children killed before, and they just don't take it seriously, like at all. There's a lot more I could say about this show, but I think I probably want to cut it short here. I don't think Louder and Prouder is a bad series, nor do I have any problem with them tackling race or other social issues, nor is it even as close to as bad as people make it out to be, but it has some massive problems and definitely f***s up some really important topics that should be handled with care, while also throwing away so much of the charm of the original to be more topical. Look, by technicality, this counts as a Disney property, okay? Iron Man is basically a Disney princess if you think about it. I kinda just wanted an excuse to talk about this show because its existence really pisses me off, and it's possibly the single biggest waste of the multiverse as a concept since Sonic fucking Prime. I have not watched a single MCU movie since Guardians 3, I don't count Deadpool and Wolverine, and I'm very aware that the quality of the MCU has gone down the toilet since Endgame. But What If seemed like a genuinely really cool series. All of these what if scenarios that give Marvel the opportunity to adapt or reference tons of really cool and beloved storylines that they can't do in the main MCU universe, or just make some cool stuff up and get some fun stories out of it. This seems like such an amazing idea for an animated show. Captain Carter, take it or leave it. This is just such a pathetic waste of a concept. You have infinite possibilities, no restraints, no worries of accidentally screwing up the main MCU timeline. You are given the opportunity to go wild with these characters, and the best you can come up with is what if Happy Hogan saved Christmas? We are reaching levels of creative bankruptcy previously thought impossible. Like, there are some cool episodes here. That Doctor Strange episode, best thing to come out of this show. Marvel Zombies, completely inferior to the comics in almost every way, but it wasn't too shabby. The Ultron episodes, pretty cool, I will admit. They're actually kinda cool. Everything else though is either completely uninteresting and boring nonsense that no one asked for, like, what if Agatha went to Hollywood? Who the f came up with that? To some of the most repugnant pieces of dog shit I think I've ever seen come from Disney, like what if Howard the Duck got hitched? This is a fetish episode. You cannot convince me otherwise. Some Disney executive with his anime girl titty mousepad, gamer girl gaming setup, sat in his bedroom littered with tissues and posters of clown girls, wearing his big f***ing stupid diaper, was typing a shameful fanfiction about this one girl from the first 4 movie having a kid with Howard the Duck, and accidentally sent it to his Microsoft Teams channel, and for some ungodly reason it was picked up and turned into an episode of Marvel's What If. This is putrid. Fuck you. The entirety of season 3 is genuinely the worst content that the MCU have ever produced, and the worst thing to happen to Marvel fans since One More Day. Why does this anthology series try to have an ongoing narrative? What is your damage, Feige? The whole point of this series is to not have that. Who the fuck is Captain Carter? Who cares about this character? She is the most obvious example of an industry plant I have ever seen. There is not a single fan of this character out there. Convince me otherwise. Why does she have an entire season's worth of episodes under her belt? This is such a waste of episode slots. Jesus Christ. The biggest slap in the face is this show's finale, where after wasting the entire show doing storylines that no one asked for, they flash a bunch of actually cool and interesting ideas on screen for a few seconds, showing the cool opportunities that could have turned into interesting and fun episodes, and just decided not to do that and turn it into the Captain Carter show for some reason. This is a fumble of biblical proportions, because we're never getting another show like this ever again. It's over. They had their chance to actually do something cool and they blew it. This is a tragedy. It's no wonder that fans were turning on the show as early as season 2. Season 1 may not have been great, but the potential was there and the idea was still relatively fresh at the time. But they squandered everything. This show is really bad and deserves basically all of the hate it gets for ruining what had the potential to be a shining beacon of creativity and actual risk-taking in the MCU for a change. Out of all of the shows on this list, this is the one I personally outright despise, and its existence alone has made me completely sick and tired of the multiverse as a concept. It has been completely corporatized, and it sucks. Well, that was a lot harder to do than I thought. If you do want to see another video like this, then do let me know in the comments, because while it's possible for me to put it together, it would also be pretty challenging. I was shocked at how many poorly received Disney shows there were that just didn't receive any sort of insane backlash or years worth of hatred. I know for a fact if many of them were released today, they definitely get a much nastier reaction. I mean, 3 of the shows I covered today weren't even that bad. The ones I covered today may not have all been terrible, but I hope revisiting them in any capacity and viewing them with a cooler head has given you a new perspective or two. If not, then I don't know, man, I tried, I guess. Anyway, that's the end of the video. Play Yakuza or something.
With the